Are you sick to death of tirelessly counting every last calorie and meticulously making sure that you're weighing every single gram of food? I'm not here to say that this approach doesn't work. In fact, the research evidence actually points towards these strategies being helpful, but they're not the be-all and end-all. I'm here to tell you today about how you can mindfully eat and intuitively navigate your nutrition to make sure that you're adopting the best approach for you in the long run. Because the research evidence also points towards the fact that the diet that is best for you is the one that you can, lean into for the longest amount of time. My name is Sam Gerlin. I'm the founder of Gerlin Nutrition. I'm a fully qualified nutritionist and I'm a health coach. And today we're going to be delving into this idea of mindful, intuitive eating and how you can really make progress with your health and your fitness goals without, as I say, counting every last calorie, meticulously weighing every last gram of food, because I just don't think it's conducive to a sustainable approach in the long run. Okay, I'm going to grab my trusty little laptop here as always, and today I really want to delve into this topic so that you're empowered to make the choices around your nutrition on a day-to-day basis that allow you to enjoyably make progress. Okay, we're going to touch on the idea of calorie counting and the pros and the cons of that. We're also then going to delve into the specific intuitive eating strategies that I adopt myself and use with my clients, and then provide some practical tips before we round things up with a little bit of a conclusion. But as I say there, we'll start with this idea of calorie counting. Okay, I'm not here to tell you that it doesn't work, because at the end of the day, it does. If you are weighing every gram of food and you are being very scientific with things, if you're a very data-driven individual, I'm not here to tell you not to calorie count. That's not the point of this video. For me personally, I can't stand weighing every last gram of food. I've tried it. I've done it for extended periods of time, and it's time-consuming. It's tiring. It's so meticulous that it becomes boring and just, monotonous, and it's not for me personally. But the research evidence, suggests that if your goal, specifically if it's a fat loss or a body composition goal, it's super important to make sure that you're in a calorie deficit. Okay, the most practical way to ensure that you are doing that with the most accuracy is probably to weigh your food and count every last calorie. However, that doesn't, necessarily fix the fact that it is boring and it is tiresome and it is meticulous. So today we are going to explore some of those other strategies that can sort of find that mid-ground between being informed on, the best approach to take to ensure that you are making progress with your goals, whilst, not sacrificing, that idea of actually enjoying the whole process. Okay, so as I mentioned at the start, we're going to get into a couple of the pros and cons of calorie counting, starting with, the time efficiency element. It's not necessarily practical. If you're, a very busy individual, weighing out every last gram of food can be pretty time consuming. It can be stress inducing. Seeing the numbers and really crunching numbers can induce stress for some people. It can be restrictive. It creates a restrictive mindset around food because you're focusing on, how much, not how much it satiates you or how good it makes you feel. It's more about the numbers as opposed to, the fuel it's providing. There's also this idea of metabolic adaptability as well. And that's a bit of a mouthful. But our body fluctuates metabolically, every day, but certainly across the course of time. So, rigid tracking doesn't always account for this. The body differs, depending on, how old we are, our sex, our age, our gender, how much muscle mass we have, our genetics, also our physical activity level. So all these variables need to be considered, and, stress as well is another one, and sleep is one more to throw in the mix. But all of these variables combined can make, us so metabolically flexible, and it's not always right to eat, exactly 2,474 calories on a certain day, because we don't know how our fluctuating stress levels and sleep and physical activity have impacted us on that specific day. Okay, we're also looking at things like natural differentiation in the foods that we eat as well. So one apple is going to have very different, nutrient density and fiber content and, sugar content and water content compared to another apple. Even at the same weight, how they're sort of, formed it is going to be different. So, calorie counting doesn't necessarily account for that either. That's why it can be really helpful to focus on quality over quantity. Also a 100 calorie snack of, from a chocolate bar compared to that 100 calories from an apple is also going to be very different. So you've got natural differentiation in the foods themselves, but also in different types of foods too. Satiety as well is another thing to consider. Different foods have different effects on how full that we feel. So consuming processed foods, which are lower in fiber, they're lower in healthy fats and protein, I'm not going to, fill us up as much as that apple or a handful of nuts or some whole foods, okay? Digestive processes as well is one more thing to consider. Again, the food matrix. I've made a whole video on this, so if you'd like to check that out, you can, search my channel for that. But the food matrix, the structure of the foods that we eat, so, foods that are highly fibrous, and high in protein are more complex to digest, which can slow that digestive process, which is what indeed contributes to those feelings of fullness. And processed foods just don't simply have that same effect. So that's another thing to consider. Behavioral change. So building healthy habits removes the need for obsessive tracking as well. Obviously, calorie counting can become a habit in itself, and if it works for you, once more, I reiterate, I'm not here to tell you not to do that. It's whatever works for the individual. But, if we've got the right habits in place in terms of, really boiling down to, every last detail here, when we go to sleep, how we align our circadian rhythm, when we eat our meals each day, when we train each day, if we can really align these habits and make a ritual out of this, it makes the whole process a lot easier from a behavioral change standpoint. And then, real world application, we're social beings. We want to go out, we want to enjoy ourselves, we want to go for meals, we want to experience things. It's not practical to track our calories when we're going for a meal, it's far better to adopt some different approaches. But, calorie counting, as I've said, isn't all bad. There are some pros, most certainly. One of them being food awareness. So calorie counting can actually help us become more aware of portion sizes, and how much we're actually eating. It gives us these sorts of ideas. This is why I recommend calorie counting as a tool as opposed to an actual strategy. So it's something that we can adopt and use on occasion, perhaps for 3 days, perhaps for a week, to really inform the approaches that we're taking. It's also great for food education. So it might be, if you're someone who feels like they're lacking a lot of nutrition knowledge, tracking for a few days can really help us understand, what certain foods are composed of from a macronutrient standpoint. So how many carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and indeed the energy, the calories themselves in the foods that we eat. And, contrary to everything that I've already said, it can promote a little bit of mindful eating from a slightly different standpoint, because that education and that awareness that I've just mentioned can, really help us understand, again, what's in our food. And it can promote that mindful eating process by encouraging us to, pay closer attention to the foods that we're consuming with that added knowledge. Okay? But that is, calorie counted and everything that I wanted to mention there. You've probably already gathered that, it's not necessarily something that I recommend as a wholesale approach, but I'm not here, once more, to say you can't calorie count. In fact, often the case is, if I find a client or myself stagnating in the pursuit of my goals, I will strip things back to basics and count some calories, weigh some food for a while to see where I might be, going wrong. How does, what I'm eating match around my training and my sleep schedule and my work schedule? Sometimes it is worth dialing in the numbers, but I much prefer, as you've gathered, a more intuitive, mindful approach. So I want to get into now some strategies that can really help with that, starting with using, visual cues for the foods that we eat. So rather than, counting foods based on how much they weigh, taking, a rough eyeball at a food and saying, okay, that's about a handful, or that's about a palmful, or, that fits, X amount of my plate, or that's a bowl full or a cup. you know, it's a lot more practical. It doesn't require that meticulousness that can be so laborious. So that's one strategy. Another one is really tapping into our hunger and satiety cues. And now I'm very, very, very big on this. If we can get to a stage where we know when we're hungry and we know when we're full, we're really, you know, unlocking new levels here. There's a principle from a Japanese principle, I believe it's from Okinawa, Hara-Hachi-Bu, which is effectively, you know, eat until you're around 80% full. Now that's obviously, you know, the 80-20 rule in Western culture, but over in Japan they use Hachi-Bu or Hara-Hachi-Bu. So the idea being you eat until you're comfortably full rather than completely full, and then you can sort of, you know, allow your body to really tap into your hunger and satiety cues. We'll get onto this, you know, in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but that's something to consider. Also, you know, the mindful eating practices themselves. So reducing distractions, you know, eating without your phone. I'm very guilty of this myself. I love a YouTube documentary whilst I'm sitting there eating my dinner. But, you know, no distractions, really enjoying and savouring each bite of food, you know, placing your knife and fork down after each mouthful, chewing 20 times, bringing the food towards you rather than yourself towards the food is another one that, you know, has really helped me in the past, really slow things down, you know, establishing that control over your food, not eating mindlessly, really, you know, paying attention to the foods that we're eating can be a real game changer. But also on the structure of this too. So being really intentional about how you structure your day of eating. So if you're a snacker, you like snacks, or you like to eat less food but more often, so you like 5 to 6 eating windows per day, really, you know, plan for that. Have your 3 main meals, but plan those snacks. Don't leave it up to chance and graze your way through the day, because that is, you know, a really sure way to make sure that you're mindlessly eating. Because once you start grazing and, you know, enjoying things without a real plan or structure or no intentionality, that's when things can get out of hand and you can quickly, you know, stack on the added calories unnecessarily. The other point behind that as well is that it also gives the digestive system a little bit of a break. If you're constantly grazing, you know, it's really hard to tap into those hunger and satiety cues. Okay, and then another one, which is another one I'm really big on, is protein and fiber prioritization. I've, you know, dispelled this fact quite a lot, but with fiber especially, the recommended daily intake is around 30 grams per day. And most people in Western culture, certainly here in the UK and the US, we struggle to get anywhere near 10. Okay, you know, I think it's upwards of 70% of our foods come from processed foods, and there's little to no fiber in these, you know, processed foods. So we want to be prioritizing those whole foods and making sure that we're taking on plenty of fiber, but also protein. The reason being they're both more complex to digest, which slows down the digestive process, which contributes to those feelings of fullness. Healthy fats can also help with that. So again, you know, maybe you look at healthy fats too, but it's all, you know, to do with, you know, how we regulate our blood sugar and preventing those energy spikes and crashes, which often result in those cravings. Okay, so protein and fiber prioritization. Distinguishing between thirst and hunger is another one. You know, if you're not sure, perhaps you're dehydrated as opposed to actually feeling genuinely hungry. So if you're noticing that you're unusually hungry one day, or you're getting cravings that, you know, don't seem to add up because you've only just finished eating, or whatever it may be, try to drink some water first. If you're not a big fan of drinking plain water, try and infuse your water. Perhaps it's with lemon or cucumber or some other citrus fruits like orange, or some berries tend to help as well. Even things like rosemary or lavender sounds crazy, but some people like those sorts of recipes too. Try infusing your water, keep it natural, keep it nice and simple. I've already mentioned this one, but food quality. Whole foods are super important for making sure that we're eating mindfully. You know, realistically, we want to be avoiding processed foods as much as possible. So if it's not, you know, meat, fish, legumes, beans, fruit, vegetables, and to an extent some whole grains. So if the whole grains are coming from sources like, you know, quinoa, rice, sourdough bread, rye bread, especially if you're particularly active. You know, I know a lot of people watching this channel will be, you know, sports people or very athletic, so certainly whole grains play a big part there in carbohydrates. But focusing on those whole foods and the quality of the foods that we're eating is super important as well. Because nutrient density also helps to naturally regulate our appetite as well, so that feeds into that as well. But the last point I want to mention there, or the penultimate point actually, is using performance and progress markers as a way to track progress that we're making, as opposed to the meticulous weighing of food and calorie counting. Okay, so if we're noticing that the food that we're eating is fueling our performance, again, this is more for those of us who are, chasing athletic pursuits, which I assume is the majority of you, then having a look at, okay, how is our running splits improving? How are we progressively overloading in the gym? Are we improving our strength? Asking these questions often, provides the answers to whether the food that we're eating is fueling us, hence mitigating the need to actually calorie track, because we know that it's progressing us towards our goal. So I hope that makes sense. But the final point is using the sustainable plate model. Now, I'll leave a little image on screen, somewhere on screen here, but this is again a model that I use in the Nutritional Growth Blueprint. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Nutritional Growth Blueprint, you can check out the link in the description down below. It's my nutrition and fitness coaching service. But the sustainable plate is a model that I can't claim full credit for. A lot of other people use it, but effectively it's a way to visualize the foods that we eat without having to count them and weigh them meticulously once more. So the idea being, we fill half of our plate with some, vegetables, cruciferous vegetables. So you might look at broccoli, leafy greens, tomatoes, carrots, all these sorts of things. And then we have a quarter of our plate with some more starches and some complex carbohydrates. So that might be your quinoa, that might be your sweet potato, that might be your baby potatoes, that might be your rice sourdough bread. The other quarter is a nice healthy source of protein. That might be your salmon, that might be your steak, your chicken breasts, your tofu, your eggs, whatever it may be. And then on top of that, we add a source of healthy fat. So that might be the extra virgin olive oil that we cook everything in. That might be an avocado. That might be some sprinkled seeds and nuts. Whatever that may be. That might be some Greek yogurt too. Obviously, there's some crossover with a lot of these foods, but that structure and that sustainable plate model can help us visualize, what we should be eating from a macronutrient split standpoint. And it often informs, a nice, healthy, balanced plate of food without relying on the meticulous, boring tracking. That also helps, make things a lot more practical too. So when we are eating out, we can read the menu and think, does this potentially fit into the sustainable plate model? Because I know that is an excellent way to sort of make progress without tracking things. We can, easily ask waiters, how much of this, can you add a little bit more of this? And, it's a more practical approach in my eyes, for a, approach more conducive to sort of overall ease when it comes to, nutrition planning, and, just making it more practical for ourselves. Okay, talking of practicality, I've got a couple of tips to round things out. A good idea is always to keep some high protein, high fiber staple foods, at close reach, at close hand. So if we do have those moments where we're strapped for time or we're particularly hungry, we fancy a snack, having those high protein, high fiber options can be really helpful. So you might look at some mixed nuts, you might look at some boiled eggs and just leaving them in the fridge. You might look at some tin tuna, which is a really practical one. Those are some ideas, like some edamame beans are excellent, and just leaving those in the fridge for those moments when you're in a pinch. Another idea to make this more practical is to batch cook or to meal prep in advance. Really big time saver. I'm massive on these sorts of ideas. So some practical approaches you might take is, as I say, to batch cook and freeze some recipes. So if you are in a pinch, it makes it easy to take the recipes out of the freezer. You can also meal prep in advance and leave the recipes in the fridge for the week, or you can cook enough at dinner for lunch the next day, whatever it may be. Whichever approach you decide to adopt, that can make this whole mindful eating, intuitive eating practice even more simple and even more practical. I've already mentioned the idea behind hydration, but the final practical tip I want to mention here is just really leaning into the flexibility that this provides. Okay, so calorie counting and weighing all your food is not particularly flexible. I've already mentioned this idea of metabolic sort of adaptability and flexibility within ourselves, but it's also important to be flexible with the approach that you take. So leaning into that flexibility can be really, really helpful. Okay, but that is everything that I wanted to touch on today about mindful eating and intuitive eating. If you have any questions off the back of anything that I've mentioned here, please do make sure to ask them in the comments down below. I've also got my Instagram link down there, so you can drop me a DM. I'm always happy to have a chat about anything nutrition related, especially when it comes to topics like this, because I'm really quite passionate about them. If there's anything else that you want to see outside of this topic, please do be sure to let me know as well. And once more, the link to some more information about my services as a coach and the nutritional growth blueprint is down below. So you're more than welcome to go and check that out. Once more, if you have any questions, please do ask me. I'm always happy to have a chat and clarify anything for you. But once more, I'll thank you for watching to this point in the video. I really do appreciate you staying till the end. But yeah, other than that, I hope you have yourself a great day. You're an absolute legend for making it this far. And I'll see you in the next one on the other side in a bit.